Hello everyone and welcome to Build Fix episode number 28, my monthly series where I help would-be PC builders choose the most cost-effective, the most intelligent and thought-out parts for their PC builds. Yes, even in the midst of a RAM shortage. But DIY PC builders are not the only ones feeling the crunch of memory being ridiculously overpriced, SSDs too for that matter, but so is Valve, as evidenced by the recently announced prices for the long-anticipated Steam machine, starting at $1,050 or $1,350 if you want 2 terabytes of storage. So by popular request and with the help of series sponsor PCPartPicker, we're gonna see if we can build a better Steam machine.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise, tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. A big thank you to PCPartPicker for sponsoring this series. We're going to be starting with a fresh parts lists today. But first, how does Build Fix work? If you're subscribed to my channel and you head over to the posts tab, about once a month you'll see this post where I request parts lists for Build Fix. There's also a semi-unrelated poll. I was going for like earth, wind, water, or fire here. Couldn't figure out what to go with for earth though, so I went with the poop emoji, which won with 33% of the vote. Way to go, guys. But from the comments below, I choose the builds I'm going to fix, and the one that was repeated by not just One True Rat, Mark Delight, and Matt J. Dillon, but many others, was due to the embargo lift on the Steam machine, reviews have gone up, and the prices are now out. Let's see if we can build one better. And that might have been a tough ask if this had come out at the price that many were anticipating, which was maybe around $700 to $800 optimistically. But that was back in fall 2025 when it was only just becoming evident how bad the RAM crisis and now storage crisis was going to get. So the prices we're going to focus on today are the base price, which is $1,049, $1,050 basically, which gets you the entire Steam machine and 512 gigabytes of storage. There's also a couple bundles that come with the controller. We're going to ignore those for now to focus on the core system hardware. The upgrade to 2 terabytes of storage runs you $1,349. Now if you're trying to build a Steam machine replacement, there's a few things you should probably keep in mind. One is that you're probably aiming to run Steam OS, which now runs on a broader range of hardware aside from just Valve's hardware, but it does play nicer with AMD-based systems as well as AMD-based graphics cards because it is Linux-based and NVIDIA drivers on Linux are a little sketchy sometimes. The other thing to consider is the form factor. The Steam machine is a very nice, tight, compact box. It is a pre-built with some upgradability. You can upgrade the memory and the storage, for example, but not too much beyond that. I'm going to be referencing the Gamers Nexus review of the Steam machine because Steve and his team did a great job testing all aspects of the device. And one of the things that Valve actually did a really good job on was making pretty adequate cooling in a very small box. But that also means that a lot of the hardware is proprietary. They're using a custom designed motherboard in order to fit everything in a compact space while also having adequate cooling for the hardware inside. All this is to say that if you want something that looks like the Steam Deck, that is that compact and that has more of a console feel as it sits in a living room environment, for example, you might just want to go with the Steam Deck because there are some advantages to the engineering work done with the cooling solution. Since we are going the DIY PC route though, I'm going to toss out the small form factor requirements. We're going to be focusing on price and performance, bang for the buck, as I usually do on this series. But if you are interested in something that's really designed to fit the smallest form factor possible, by all means, let me know in the comments below. So in terms of performance, we need to match or do better than an AMD Zen 4 6-core processor. That basically means your Ryzen 7000 series 6 cores, but do note, since some of the hardware in the Steam machine actually runs a little bit below spec in order to fit the thermal requirements, both the 6-core CPU and the GPU, which is an RDNA 3-based solution with 28 compute units and 8 gigs of GDDR6, run a little bit slower than their desktop counterparts would in a thermally unconstrained environment. We also have 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory that's running at DDR5 5600, and even Valve had to make some concessions when it comes to the memory configuration. They said you might get a box that ships with 2 8 gigabyte sticks of DDR5, or you might get a box that ships with one 16 gigabyte stick. With only one DIMM installed, you're not going to have dual channel memory support, which Valve says doesn't really have too much of an impact on gaming performance, broadly speaking, but that hasn't really been tested at this point.
Like, you know, at some point you might have 2 DIMMs, at some point you might have 1. It just changes based on the supply that we can secure. But at the end of the day, it should be comparable speeds and all that.
Gamers Nexus made a nice chart showing what that means in terms of real-world alternatives, at least when it comes to the GPU. The upshot is that with an Intel Arc B580 or a Radeon RX 7600 or 7600 XT, you will get notably better performance, anywhere from 5 to 15 or 20, sometimes even as much as 30 to 35% if you're talking about ray tracing. Meanwhile, when it comes to the GPU, because it is thermally constrained, while it is a Zen 4-based solution, it often struggles to keep up with Zen 3-based CPUs like the Ryzen 5 3600. So that gives us some targets to aim at. Of course, the next question is what is actually available on the market, especially if we're sticking with the AM5 socket, which means we're going to need DDR5 memory. I'm also going to try an aim 4 solution to see how much that can shave off in terms of the overall cost. But if we're looking at Zen 4 AM5 CPUs, which is the Ryzen 7000 series, the cheapest ones available right now per PCPartPicker are like the 7600X, which is actually on sale for $147 at the moment, which would be a pretty good solution. Although the X series does not come with a CPU cooler, which means we'd need to add another $30 or so to accommodate that. We have some other 6-core Ryzen 7000 series CPUs like the 7500F and 7400F down here, not currently being picked up by PCPartPicker's price scraper, or not currently available from some place that I guess is reputable enough. But if you're willing to go with a marketplace seller on Newegg, you can get the 7400F for about $114, $115 right now, being sold by Senitech Global, which has reasonable feedback of 4.4 out of 5 eggs. Now, if the 7600X shipped with a CPU cooler, I'd say just go with that, but it doesn't. And actually the 7600, which is slower, is currently going for $211, which is too much money. Since we need a cooler as well, but we're only cooling a 6-core, I've added the Thermalright Assassin Spirit 120 Evo Black, which is currently on sale for just over $20. And we're gonna add the GPU next, looking at 7600 and 7600 XT options off the bat. Cheapest options currently listed are about $280. That's not the best price for a slightly older GPU, launched in 2023, but over on the Tech Power Up GPU page, they have a relative performance chart list thing here where you can see kind of what's in the same ballpark. So for instance, the B580 is a little bit faster. The 7600 XT is only going to get you about 6% more performance. So particularly when it comes to AMD's rollout of like FSR down to previous generations, compatibility with SteamOS, the 7600 really seems like the best bet. 7600 XT has 16 gigs of VRAM, so that's maybe a consideration for an upgrade for about $70 or $80 more. Between the ASRock and the XFX, that's a bit of a toss-up. I guess I'll go with the ASRock because it has a higher boost clock. Give me just a moment to populate a motherboard, case, and power supply. For our motherboard, we have more budget chipsets like A620 and A620A, but I'd really prefer going with a B650 or even B850 if we can find one that is reasonably priced. You get better I/O with the B650, you're gonna have better upgrade potential if you want to drop in a higher end CPU down the line. Micro ATX motherboards often have a little bit of a pricing edge when it comes to trying to stick to a budget. The ASRock B650M Pro RS right here is only $90. So I'm gonna go with this one because it has 1, 2, 3 M.2 slots down here. It's actually got 4 DIMM slots as well, which is maybe less useful in today's environment, but between 2 DIMM slots and 4 DIMM slots, I'll go with 4 for the same price. We are getting a compatibility warning because we'll need to update the motherboard's BIOS in order to recognize this processor. If it doesn't ship with an up-to-date BIOS, that shouldn't be a problem. And then when it comes to case and power supply, the decisions here are somewhat arbitrary. I'm going to be focusing on the budget, and I want to go with a micro ATX case because I always feel weird putting a micro ATX motherboard in a full-size ATX case. It's a waste of space. There's some really solid options here for around $50, like the Fantex XT M3 and V3. Montech has the X5M, NZXT has the H3 Flow, but we're trying to stick to a budget, so the Masterbox Q300L from Cooler Master gets extra points for configurability. It doesn't have like the most fabulous airflow or anything, but since we're not putting in a lot of hardware, we can totally get away with it for $33. It also ships with at least 1 fan, so you're gonna have some airflow in there out of the gate. Next, we need a power supply. Our estimated wattage for our parts so far is 323 watts. It's actually recommended to have a 550 watt power supply at minimum for an RX 7600, though you can get away with 450 or 500 or so if it's a decently well-built PSU. So looking at wattage ranges between 500 and 750 watts, 80 plus gold or bronze, I would say at minimum. And that gives us this, the MSI Mag A550BN, 80 plus bronze certified, currently on Prime Day deal for about $43. All right, that brings our current running total to $581, leaving only the 2 most challenging parts to add, the memory and the storage. So for memory, first a simple test. We're running the compatibility filter, so it's only going to show us DDR5 memory that's compatible with the motherboard. For a single 16 gig stick, which some Steam machines might be shipping with, the cheapest option is $179, and that's for DDR5 4800 speed. Probably worth spending an extra $8 or $9 for this Viper Elite stick, which is DDR5 6000 at least. Actually pretty good timings on that one. But 2x8 gigs is going to be a better bet, because then you'll be able to have dual channel support. And here our cheapest option is this Team Group T-Force Vulcan DDR5 6000 CL38. Not the best, but could be worse. But that is $200, and that's going to be our choice because the closest next runner-up is $225. And this is partially thanks to the Newegg Doorbuster event, which definitely is not at all related to the Amazon Prime Day deals or whatever going on right now. Anyway, point is $200 for 16 gigs of DDR5 seems somehow good. Of course, that's very relatively speaking. Now, when it comes to storage, if you want an actual NVMe M.2 SSD, you're going to need to pay $70 right now for a 512 gig ADATA Legend 710, and that's just to match the capacity of the Steam machine. So just adding that to see what our bare minimum option is, and look, $856 right now. That's a solid $200 or so savings over what the Steam machine would cost you, assuming you can get on the wait list and actually get one and everything. So that makes me somewhat happy that you can do that and you can save some money over the Steam machine, and you could even get SteamOS and install it for free and everything. Meanwhile, if you wanted to upgrade that to the Steam Machine $1,350 version, which has 2 terabytes of storage, the cheapest option there is the Crucial E100. What is this drive? I haven't seen this drive before. It looks pretty bare bones, but it's actually PCIe Gen 4x4 and up to 5,000 megabytes per second reads, of course. How about writes? What are the writes? 4,500 megabytes per second writes as well. Not terrible given that it's the cheapest 2 terabyte drive currently available. Right, so dropping that in brings our total to $1,011-ish. A savings of more than $300 over the Steam Machine upgrade to 2 terabyte version. Then I wanted to do sort of a V3 of this. If you're not quite as concerned about CPU performance and you're okay with building on a previous generation platform, we can ditch the CPU and the motherboard and our $200 16 gig memory kit. Then we can see what kind of savings we can get with AM4. We can get a less expensive CPU. It's not going to be quite as fast, but it's still perfectly adequate for gaming. We're also going to be able to take advantage of DDR4 memory, which can be relatively slightly less expensive than DDR5. Now, the AM4 upgrade that would be a little bit faster than the 6-core CPU that's installed in the Steam machine would be the 5600X. It's actually a bit faster in some tests, but it's also $180, which doesn't sit well since its previous gen. You can get either the 7600X for about $150 right now, or the aforementioned 7400F for about $115. So building on this platform only really makes sense if you're trying to stick to a serious budget. You're willing to give up a little bit of CPU performance by going with the Ryzen 5 5500. This one is going to be several steps behind like the 5600 and 5600X because it only has 16 megs of L3 cache. This CPU is part of the Cezanne family, which is more of like a mobile-oriented chip, but it is $83, so the price is really the selling point here. We can also pair that with a B550 series motherboard. The ASRock B550M HDV is a great choice for about 70 bucks. We also have the Gigabyte B550MK Micro, which it's like they didn't even bother to put any heat sinks on the VRMs on this board. I guess the same applies to the ASRock. So either way, we're looking at super budget boards that are pretty cut down. Here, the ASRock B550M Pro 4 actually has, you know, some heat sinks and an M.2 slot cover. It's within $10 or $12 of the cheapest alternative otherwise, so we'll go with that one. And then for our DDR4 memory kit, we're going with the 2x8 gig configuration yet again, and here we can save $80, $90 plus by going with DDR4. We have a silicon power kit. Since there's a few grouped up in this range, I'm just gonna look for the best first word latency, which is gonna be 10 nanoseconds. So this option here seems to fit the bill, about $108 for this silicon power kit. And there we go. We have actually, the CPU includes a box cooler, so we can save another $20 by removing our Thermalright Assassin Spirit. Of course, you could keep that on there if you want a better cooler that's probably gonna run a little bit quieter, but that brings our total down to less than $850. Yes, you have a slightly slower CPU, but you have a better graphics card. You have pretty similar performance everywhere else, and I also left in the 2 terabyte NVMe SSD. So there's our build for less than $850 with a 2 terabyte storage upgrade, about about $200 cheaper than the Steam Machine is currently retailing for. Of course, you're not going to get quite the same like tiny little package and everything, but you're also going to have potentially more upgrade paths available, especially if you go with the slightly more expensive AM5 option rather than AM4. That is all the time I have for this video, you guys. I will post links to the parts I chose, the PC part picker lists down in the video description if you want to check them out. You can edit those builds and then swap in parts that might better fit your needs, or maybe to accommodate price savings options. Like if you already have some storage on hand, or if you've already got some DDR4 memory that you can repurpose, you can really bring the cost down closer to $500 or $600 for some of these systems, which is a great alternative for anyone who was waiting on the Steam Machine, hoping it would be $700 or so, but then was a little bit discouraged by the plus $1,000 price announced this week. But if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to hit the thumbs up button, that's greatly appreciated. Of course, subscribe if you want to be notified when my post goes up for next month's build fix. And again, links in the description to the parts lists as well as my store at paulshardware.net, where you can help support my channel by buying yourself some high quality merch, t-shirts, hoodies, beer sets, and more. Thank you guys once again for watching. We'll see you all in the next one.